Hello, friends and neighbors, and welcome back to the Gifts for Glory podcast. I'm your host, Dave Eber, and this week we talk comedy and podcasting with award-winning podcaster Chris Staron, host of the Truce Podcast. He was on our show back in the fall. We're having him back now to just talk about some more comedy, some podcasting, and just have a whole lot of fun. Chris won 2 awards at the Spark Christian Podcast Conference earlier this year, winning both the Outstanding Podcast Host Male Division and also won the Outstanding Podcast Produced. So he won for both production and hosting. So congratulations to Chris. We're really excited to celebrate him and bring him on as an award-winning podcaster here on the Gifts for Glory podcast. Now, as we put this together, we're still in this uncertain time. And that is not what we're going to be talking about today. This is not your COVID-19 episode, and I'm not going to do one. I want to offer something different. This episode doesn't cover that at all. Chris and I, we just chat. So if you're looking for COVID-19 coverage, there's plenty out there. That's not what we're about for this episode of the Gifts of Glory podcast. But before we get to our conversation with Chris, I hope that you're doing well. And as you make plans for events later this year or on into 2021, and you're looking for affordable quality entertainment that won't offend your audience or your budget, consider bringing in well-versed comedy. We're clean, we're family-friendly, and we're comedy for all ages. We've produced our own shows at Second City Theaters, we've headlined 2 nights at Gutty's Comedy Club in suburban Indianapolis, and we've entertained many audiences all throughout Chicagoland the last 7 years. So if you or your organization, if you're thinking about hosting an outreach event, a date night, a youth lock event, a fundraiser, a men's or women's, or a couples conference or retreat, Well-Versed Comedy is ready, willing, and able to bring you a one-of-a-kind experience to make your event one to remember, and for all the right reasons. If you want to get in contact with us, email us at booking@wellversedcomedy.com. booking@wellversedcomedy.com to get the event going so that we can get out there and make it a one-of-a-kind show. And now let's move on to our Devotions with Dave segment. Each week I want to bring you a passage of Scripture and kind of explain what I think it means and what I believe it means and what God is trying to tell us. If you have any questions or any favorite passages that you'd like to share on the Gifts for Glory podcast, email me directly and let me know, and we may use it on our next Devotions with Dave segment. So for this week, we're reading out of 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 1 through 5. So 2 Timothy 4, verses 1 through 5. Paul writes, I solemnly urge you, in the presence of God and Christ Jesus, who will someday judge the living and the dead when he comes to set up his kingdom, preach the word of God, be prepared, whether the time is favorable or not. Patiently correct, rebuke, and encourage your people with good teaching. For a time is coming when people will no longer listen to sound or wholesome teaching. They will follow their own desires and will look for teachers who will tell them whatever their itching ears want to hear. They will reject the truth and chase after myths. But you should keep a clear mind in every situation. Don't be afraid of suffering for the Lord. Work at telling others the good news and fully carry out the ministry God has given you. That's 2 Timothy 4, verses 1 through 5 here on the Devotions with Dave segment. And it's really, these are the times that Paul is talking about today, where many people are turning away from wholesome teaching. They're turning away from the full gospel truth. They're looking for their own interpretation. As it says, for a time is coming when people will no longer listen to sound and wholesome teaching. And we're starting to see that because there's so many divisions in the church because of what feels good or what's popular. But Paul urges Timothy very clearly in verse 2, preach the word of God. Be prepared, whether the time is favorable or not. And he also is also clear here, patiently correct, rebuke, and encourage your people with good teaching. So you use good teaching and you do it patiently. Sometimes we get overzealous in our correction or our rebukes or our encouragements, and sometimes we forget that we need to be patient. We're all on this road together, but we're on different stages in our walk. So we have to use patience. Paul talks in 1 Corinthians 13 about love, using love as the way to use your spiritual giftings. So we're supposed to work in our giftings. We're supposed to work in our knowledge and understanding of the Bible, but we have to do it patiently and with love, and that way that we can do it and use good teaching. So I just want to encourage you this week, spend time in your Word. Many of us are home right now, either working from home or are unfortunately out of work because of everything going on. So I want to encourage you to spend time in the Word, find hope in the Word, find encouragement in the Word and in your time with God. Our scripture again this week was from 2 Timothy 4, verses 1 through 5. I solemnly urge you in the presence of God and Christ Jesus, who will someday judge the living and the dead when he comes to set up his kingdom. Preach the word of God. Be prepared whether the time is favorable or not. Patiently correct, rebuke, and encourage your people with good teaching. For a time is coming when people will no longer listen to sound and wholesome teaching. They will follow their own desires and will look for teachers who will tell them whatever their itching ears want to hear. They will reject the truth and chase after myths. But you should keep a clear mind in every situation. Don't be afraid of suffering for the Lord. Work at telling others the good news and fully carry out the ministry God has given you. 2 Timothy 4, 1 through 5. That was our Devotions with Dave segment for this episode. Now let's get on to my conversation with Chris Staron, the award-winning podcaster, the host of the Truce Podcast, right here on the Gifts of Glory podcast, where we celebrate and promote men and women who use their gifts for God's glory. And welcome back to the Gifts of Glory podcast. Dave Ebert, now joined by Chris Staron. Chris coming to us all the way from Wyoming, which I do believe fits within the guidelines of social distancing.
Almost.
I think we're safe distance, right?
Yeah, almost. We're risking it a little bit.
Okay. Well, just to be sure, I'm actually 6 feet away from my computer at this point.
Nice. Good call. Well, I mean, you think about all the diseases that live on your phone screen. Because
right.
You never wash them, so maybe we need to be further away from our phones.
That's actually very true. I think people are more scared of the cancer, but we all read our phones while we're in the restroom. I don't think that there's a person in today that doesn't do it, so I think there's more disease on your screen than there is anywhere else.
Oh yeah, it's bad news. Thank goodness I haven't done a swab test of my phone, because I'm sure I would be really disturbed.
But Chris, you like me, you're a podcaster.
Yeah.
You also do improv comedy out there. And we just wanted to get on and talk about some comedy, talk about podcasting, and not address the C word at all, because that's what everyone else is doing. Let's be different.
And by that he means coronavirus. Because if you
did it.
Well, I know. And if you say the C word, it sounds like something else.
Oh yeah, C word. We're talking about COVID-19.
Yes, there you go.
The coronavirus, which I'm immune to, because as somebody that's pursuing licensing in ministry, I don't drink, so I'm completely immune.
And I am weak of body, and so I am probably very susceptible. So we'll balance each other out.
Right. So, Chris, you host the Truce Podcast, and you've been with us before, but for those that maybe have missed that episode, or it's been a while, tell us a little bit about the Truce Podcast and what your mission is with it, and what you hope that people will get out when they listen to it.
Yeah. Well, Truce is a show you can get on your favorite podcasting platform or at trucepodcast.com. And it is a history show that looks at the church. It's not really a church history podcast. It's more seeing how we kind of mix and mingle with history. And also all those things that kind of glom onto Christianity, like pyramid schemes, political campaigns, and also patriotism, which is something we're just starting to talk about in season 3 here. And there are a lot of reasons I talk about the show. The main one is that we as Christians are constantly sniping at the world, the world that we are supposed to be loving.
Right.
The people that we're supposed to be loving in the world. without loving the world. And so I think a lot of that comes from us not listening to each other and not really knowing what each other are talking about. So a lot of what the show does is being like, okay, what do you mean by this? What do we mean by that? And figure those things out. And so the main goal is to try to undo those knots, those confusing spots that we're in.
And I think that's important too, because especially in American society, the last 15 years or maybe even longer, we've been in this place of there's either A or B, or there's either right versus left, or this side versus that. And I think by really communicating and talking and encouraging that throughout the history and the things that you're discussing, there's nuance, there's differences, and there's also places of agreement between people who maybe are completely opposed. So by encouraging the conversation and encouraging us to delve deeper into the world but still also being not a part of it, I think it's an important thing. Am I seeing that perspective right?
Yeah, you are. Yeah, I mean, I went to the Podcast Movement Conference last year. Super excited to go. Had a best time. And because my show is a Christian show, whenever people would ask me about my gig, I got to tell them about the church and about God, and had a lot of really deep religious conversations with people. But in the process of that, they would also bring up whatever baggage has been associated in their mind with the church. So a lot of times it was politics. And so here I am trying to share the gospel, and then now I'm trying to, back up U.S. foreign policy, where it's like, okay, that's a whole different thing. But we as Christians have gotten ourselves so tied up in everything. Sometimes the world doesn't really know how to react to us or to the gospel. They see all those other things that we're tied into. And sometimes that's just, we don't understand each other's terms. We don't understand each other's words. We don't understand why some Christians believe those things, but not all Christians are into those things. So yeah, hopefully the show can help undo some of those struggles.
So how big would you say something like having good hermeneutics plays into the messaging of your show?
Oh, it's good. I mean, it's big. Like a lot of what... And also, like, Christianity is gigantic, which is worth saying. Before you get upset with your neighbor who is slightly different in their beliefs than you, remember that throughout history, Christianity has been so big. The difference between the Russian Orthodox Church and your local Protestant church is going to be very big, but they call themselves Christian as well. Some Mormons call themselves Christians, even though it is a completely different religion. The hard thing with Truce is that I'm always talking about Christianity, but it means so many different things to a lot of different people. So I'm trying to keep it really straight down the line, on theology. Just make sure everything is really on the up and up if I can. And if it's not, if I'm talking about a sect that has a different belief system, I'll try to make that clear. But Christianity is gigantic, so it is a huge task. But we do our best as podcasters, especially those of us who are not full-time yet.
Sure. Have you been changed in how you think of your relationship to Christ? Have any of your theologies changed as a result of your interviews and your show?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the main things is that, the Bible tells us that we are to love the church. We are to love God's people. And when I started the show, I was really struggling with that, if I'm being honest, because we Christians are people too, and people can be very difficult at times. It took, in doing this show, I've been able to kind of cool myself down and see. Not just that, the main thing is being able to see why we need Jesus, especially even in the Christian church, because oftentimes we can put him aside for whatever causes we're involved in or all those things. But we are fallen people too. And so the show has really helped me to see how my brothers and sisters get caught up in different things, and how I get caught up in different things, and how sometimes I make little idols out of my things, just the same way they do. And that has really helped me to have compassion for my brothers and sisters in Christ. Whereas I was pretty angry when this show started. I think I hit it pretty well, but it has really helped me to calm down a lot, and to learn to love the church more.
So let's flip that coin. Has there been an interview or a broadcast where you've talked to somebody, and in the course of that interview, you've changed their mind or maybe softened their heart that you have been told or have borne witness to?
I'm not really sure that I have. I think one of the interesting things is that a lot of the people I've interviewed for season 3 have not been Christians. Because I'm interviewing historians, and I want to find somebody who really knows the material. And sometimes that means talking to a non-Christian. And weirdly, it's the non-Christians who share my show the most, which is really fascinating to me. And I don't fully understand why. But my non-Christian guests share my show way more than my Christian guests. So my hope is that in it going out amongst their circle of friends, that it can have an impact. But oftentimes during my interviews, I'm not really debating somebody. I'm usually interviewing them because they're an expert, and so I just want to hear what their thing is. Though I have had some nice conversations with people about their faith. Oftentimes it feels like God is working on them once they hear the finished episode.
Very nice. So you're working on season 3 currently.
Yeah.
In your first 2 seasons, what have been your biggest or favorite interviews so far?
I did one. I did one with these 2 guys from NPR's Embedded podcast, and we're talking like they were in studios that were so fancy, and like the audio was so good, and I was shoved in my hall closet, trying to record good sound with that interview. But they took, I think each of them took like 40 minutes out of their day to talk to me, just a lowly podcaster. And that was a real thrill, to be able to talk with these guys that I looked up to, but also to kind of get into spiritual questions with them, because they were talking about a politician and why, and it was an expose on there about a politician. And I was asking them, why did you decide to include his faith in your story? Because they didn't have to, but they ended up making that a part of his character on the show. And in doing so, we got to kind of talk about how they portrayed him as a Christian. And he was kind of a shady dude. So unfortunately, the Christianity got tied to some shady stuff. And so I got to ask him, why did you decide to include that in there? And that was a thrill for me. So I've been really excited. I don't know if you've noticed this, but doing podcasting, sometimes like really awesome people want to talk to you. Right. And that's so exciting. There have been authors where I've read their book and I'm like, oh, there's no way they would talk to me, but I have to try. And sometimes they say yes. And, 2/3 of the time they say no, but 1/3 of the time they say yes. So it's just been a thrill to be able to do it.
Yeah, I was actually surprised last fall, right in the height of the popularity of Overcomer, I got a chance to interview Cameron Arnett, who played Thomas Hill, one of the main characters in Overcomer.
Awesome.
And it was really very cool. And you'd be amazed how many people, like you said, or people who we're talking to right now, you'd be amazed who's willing to talk. And not to be rude or mean or judgmental, but there is there's that vanity of like, wow, somebody, these people are thinking like, sure, I'd love to talk about myself.
Yeah.
And it's fun because most of the time on a podcast, It's going to be a lot more informal than a TV interview where there's a chance of that gotcha question. Where in a podcast, most everybody is just chill and just wants to get to know the person and not so much find the dirt. So I think that podcast is a very disarming venue for people who are seen as, for lack of a better term, celebrities or famous or important people in their field. I know that you got an interview with Phil Vischer.
Yeah, that was super exciting, and he's a really nice guy, and was very giving of his time. He just put out a children's Bible and came on the talk for like 45 minutes, and that was just amazing to get a big name like that. Although I was just starting this series, this season 3 is basically how has Russian communism impacted the American Christian church, which is a gigantic topic that's going to take me a whole year to finish. But I got this chance to talk to Phil Vischer. I'm like, I know that doesn't fit anywhere within that theme, but I'm going to talk to Phil Vischer.
Oh yeah.
If you get the chance, you take it. That was a real thrill to be able to do. But I think I'm often more nervous for those big ticket ones than I really should be. I don't know if you find that. Like often, I'm probably more nervous than they are.
Oh yeah, there's been a couple like the Cameron Arnett interview, and then I interviewed somebody that is a celebrity in the Chicago area. They're one of the Moody radio hosts.
Yeah.
So I felt a little level of having to step up my game to prove myself worthy of this interview, which is entirely a vanity thing on my part. Because they're relaxed, like, hey, it's just a conversation between two people talking about something that we both find interesting.
Yeah.
And I think that's, again, goes to that environment of being just a disarming medium, of just being together and just chatting. Mm-hmm. Obviously, that also fluctuates based on the format of the show and what the podcast is about. Mm-hmm. Where like yours is about history and really a pursuit of truth.
Yeah.
And mine is more about just learning about people within God's kingdom and who are doing different things to grow and advance the kingdom for God and to honor Him. So I'm sure that there are more expose type podcasts out there where it's not quite as disarming, but that going in. But it's just, podcasting is a very interesting thing. Because you have basically just two people just talking and you you're like spying in on this friendly conversation.
Yeah, it can be. I had one confrontational podcast episode that I never released the full part of. I just released like a little bit in the middle of another episode. It was like buried because I was a little. I was talking to a guy who's basically a politician and was kind of giving me the company line. And I was just like, yeah, but that doesn't make any sense. You need to explain yourself more. And he couldn't. He was just like giving me the company line or trying to dodge. And I got frustrated and never aired it, even though he was kind of a name. But I don't know, couldn't deal with it. I would eventually like to get to the place where I'm comfortable being able to confront people about stuff if I need to. But for now, I'm just looking for people that I admire until I get build up the thick skin.
Sure. And that, as you mentioned on the Podcast Association Zoom meeting the other day, that's one of those things you'll just dump on your Patreon.
I didn't even dump that one. It's still just sitting on my hard drive waiting because I actually tried to make it into an episode where I was going to talk about his company line and the difficulties of that being tied to Christianity, and I just couldn't get it to a place where I liked it. I think one of the hard things about my show is that I will sometimes get straight up to a finished episode and be like, yeah, I can't release this. It just does not work. And so I'd eventually like to be at the place where that's okay for me. I work a full-time job. And so to be able to throw away all those hours of work is very difficult. But it is, the right thing to do for my audience. But I eventually like to get to the place where I'm self-sustaining enough that it's I can just toss bad ideas away faster and not have to worry about the work I've put into them. Because sometimes you release an episode and you're like, well, I need an episode this week. It may not be the best, but I got to do one. So, yeah.
So I think you mentioned before when we spoke that you spend in upwards of 20 to 30 hours per episode between research and production.
Yeah, I do. It's a lot. I think the numbers have actually gone up. So it depends. Like if it's just a normal interview, which is very rare for my show, it could take maybe 5 to 10 hours. But then if it's one of the other more complex episodes, you're probably looking at 15 to 40 hours per episode.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, but I think you can hear it when you listen to it. I really go for production value on the show.
Absolutely, and we'll have the links in the in our podcast notes. So anybody that's interested in checking out, and I would say that anybody that has any interest in church history and the different things that you cover, I highly recommend checking out the Truce Podcast. All the links will be in the show notes. And how often do you release your episodes?
It's every 2 weeks. I was doing every week last year, and I kind of couldn't deal with life because I was working so hard. And so this has been a lot better. I'm still working all the time, but it allows me to make higher quality episodes. So it's every other week.
And do you have a specific day during the week that you release, or is it just when you? Oh
yeah, it's Tuesdays. Right. Yeah, Tuesday mornings.
Okay.
Every other week, which has been great. And you'll be able to catch this thing if you start listening now. I'd recommend starting at the beginning of season 3, and we get into the history of the Romanov family in Russia. And since we're talking about how Russian communism impacted American Christianity, I didn't want to just be like, the Russians are bad, just make them the bad guys and not talk about them or not talk about how they got to a place where they were communist. I wanted to kind of take you on that journey. So I when I did the episodes on the Romanov, some people were like, these are really great. Where are you going with this? How does this have anything to do with the church? But I feel like it's really important. One of the things we can't do in the church is be like those people. Or like that, right. Because those people are also sinners who need Jesus just as much as you and me. And if we call them those people, it allows us to keep them at arm's length and not have to deal with them. So my hope is to try to get you in the mindset of where you can kind of see where communism came in, cover the history of that, so that when we turn around and talk about the United States and our reaction to that, you have a deeper understanding instead of just being like, oh, it's the communists, it's those people. I try to avoid that whenever I can.
Sure. And that mindset of those people, that's what got Jonah stuck in a fish for 3 days.
One of the greatest things about Jonah is that he's going to talk to the people in Nineveh, which was the capital of the Assyrian Empire. And the Assyrians, I think it's 100 years later, would then come and conquer his people. So his mission was to go and share the gospel. Well, share the God with the people who were about to come and invade his people, which is an incredible idea. It gives you an understanding of why he was afraid to go or why he didn't want to go. But it also gives you a really solid idea of how incredible our God is, that he would want to make himself known to the enemy of his people. That's just an incredible thing.
Yeah, and that shows, again, God's love, even for people that are not what we think are his kind of people. They came and, they took over Israel. He loved the people that Israel conquered and he commanded to put to death, but they had to face their judgment.
Yeah. So
you read in the Old Testament, you think that God is this vindictive, vengeful God. He's just a righteous God. And so God loves everybody, and his wish is that none should perish.
Yeah.
So that's why Jonah had to go and give them the opportunity to hear the truth.
Yeah. Incredible. And I would also stand up for the Old Testament. We often think of it as the half of the book, half of the Bible that has all the wrath in it. But the New Testament, you got the main character there are 4 accounts of him being crucified. You've got Stephen being beheaded. Paul is, beaten, shipwrecked, thrown out of towns. And the book of Revelation is in the New Testament. So there's also kind of a lot of wrath in the New Testament as well. Sorry. I always stand up for the Old Testament. I love the Old Testament.
And the Old Testament transitioning to the New Testament is God's support of your model for what you do with your podcast, because you give the history so that there's context.
Yeah.
You said that you sometimes get the question of, what does this have to do with the church? Mm-hmm. Well, to understand what you're going to cover as you get further along, you need the foundation, you need the context. So I think in our society we get too big a hurry to get to the fun stuff and the good stuff without wanting to really understand and appreciate what put that in motion. We want to see the final domino fall, but we don't want to see what caused the first one.
Right. Well, and it's also, we've kind of gotten used to always knowing who the bad guy is in whatever story we're in. And sometimes there are multiple bad guys throughout time, and sometimes we're the bad guy. And that's really hard to hear. Oftentimes what I'm trying to tell in these stories is not just who are those people, but also figure out, okay, if we Christians did something inappropriate, how did we get there? And how can we avoid doing that again? So with Napoleon Bonaparte, who is a fascinating character in history, he ended up fooling people into thinking that he was a Christian. He put on a good show for people, but he wasn't one. And then when he was in Egypt doing war campaigns, he pretended that he was a Muslim so he could impress the people there, reading from the Quran and trying to take part in some of their ceremonies, even to the point of saying, if he had just worn the big hat and the puffy pants, he probably would have conquered Egypt. He was just a major poser. But because people in his time weren't really willing to call him out on it, he got away with it for a while. And so I'm always looking at those fascinating stories to be how could we have done better? How could the church have been okay, he's a poser, and maybe save the world a little bit of destruction. Who knows?
Right. So you did cover Napoleon in one of your episodes? Yeah.
I get, aside from the show, I get fascinated by all these side topics. And so I'll read books on corporate malfeasance. I just finished one on the Mongol Empire that I'll probably never make an episode on. So I read 4 books, probably about 2,000 pages total, about Napoleon Bonaparte. And I kept, as I was going through, I hadn't had a plan to make an episode about him. I was just doing this for my own, enjoyment. And then I started seeing how he was manipulating religious people. And I was I got to make a show about this, which was great because I got to talk to a historian who had studied his religious beliefs. And then we got to kind of geek out together. Even when the mics were off, we were having a great time. And I think that's one of the other joys of podcasting is those little nerdy things that you get all excited about. There's somebody else out there who wants to talk to you about that. And I just love those opportunities to be able to do that.
So I was just curious if your episode covering Napoleon was short.
I think it's probably 25 minutes, maybe half an hour. Yeah.
That was a bad joke.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Yeah. Him being short. I got I didn't hear the rim shot, so I didn't know if it was a joke. Oh my gosh, that's funny.
The sound effects are added in post.
Oh, they are. Okay, I got you. Okay, good call. Good call. Clean audio this way. Yeah.
Very good.
He's a fascinating guy. Are there any people that you or any topics you get fascinated by that you're this is not going to make it in the show, but this is just for me?
Well, not really. And when it's somebody that's doing something really cool, but they're not doing it from a Christian drive.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of people that I get interested in, but I don't bring on my show because the whole purpose is to just highlight the body of Christ and to promote people that are doing things so we could either inspire others that may have that same gifting but don't realize they can use it for God, or maybe inspire people to search and see what gifting they have, because it shows how dynamic the body of Christ can be. So when I talk to people that are doing really cool and fun things, I have actor friends and improviser friends that do improv and comedy and performing from a secular perspective with no tip of the hat in any way, shape, or form to Jesus, to God, to the Holy Spirit. Those are people that that intrigue me, but would never make it to my show.
Right.
There's a lot of comedy is huge in my life, so there's a lot of really fun comedians that they're really great, but even if I met them, I'd be like, nah, I'm not going to bring you on.
Yeah.
Just because you don't fit what we're talking about.
Right. I was talking more like outside of the show. If there are things
right.
you get like super into that don't make it in the show.
Like pro wrestling. That's something I'm into.
Yeah.
That's that was that's where all of my acting and performing training comes from.
Oh.
Is being on the stage of a pro wrestling show.
Yeah.
Being a pro wrestler is doing physical improv theater in the round.
Right.
There's no safety net. There's no take two. You go out there, you tell your story, and you feed off the crowd. You feed off your scene partner, which is either your tag team partner or your opponent or all the above. And you improvise. If things are going well, you let it go a little bit longer. If things are not going well, you call scene as quick as possible and let the show go on.
Awesome.
The pro wrestling, not necessarily something that I would really dive into unless, I got somebody like a Shawn Michaels who's, or Sting, who are open and devout Christians.
Huh.
Those would be two really fun interviews.
You should go for it.
I might try. I have no idea how to make that connection.
Or Twitter. Just try them on Twitter.
Yeah, I'll try Twitter. I might have to do that.
Yeah.
So you may have inspired me. I may have the Stinger on.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
I don't know how we would do it. I don't know if we do it with Zencastr or if we do it with Skype. But either way, I would wear the face paint.
You'd have to.
Oh yeah, Bob. My wife Bobby would help me get that full on Crow Sting face paint.
Go for it. You have to
have the old school Metallica in the background from his WCW days. But for the most part, pro wrestling is probably not going to make it.
I love that stuff. Like my brother and I, when we're at the grocery store or something, or we're talking to somebody who has a pretty repetitive job, and people never have an in-depth conversation with them. My brother and I like to ask, what is the one thing in this world that you never get to talk about, but you are super excited about? I love hearing people's responses to that, because you get interesting things like pro wrestling or Napoleon Bonaparte, or it's a nice, fast way to get deep with people. I find when you find out what they really enjoy instead of just the little "how's the weather" stuff.
Right. That's actually very cool, and that's a great. That would be a great improv thing if you're ever doing a workshop, is just spend 30 seconds talking about something that you never get a chance to talk about, but you love.
Yeah.
I might have to hijack that.
Go for it.
I'll call it the Staron exercise.
I love it.
It is so dubbed.
Yeah. We've invented a lot of games in our improv troupe, and I've invented several. And we always kind of take a little bit of pride in being like, we invented this one by ourselves. It's one of the fun things about improv is that you get to create your own forms and try them.
Oh yeah.
If you can convince your team to try them, they aren't always excited about every idea.
Sometimes you got to throw it on them on stage in front of an audience where they have to yes and. You're like, you know what? We got a little bit extra time before the show ends. I want to try something new. We've never rehearsed it.
Oh.
This is the game of blah.
Yeah.
And then your teammates have to listen just as the audience is listening as you explain how the game is played.
Yeah.
And then you just see what happens.
Oh my goodness. You know what the funny thing about improv is, like, even though it is off the cuff, it is very much about structure and safety. And I think that my team would probably have a fit if I did what you just said. Because I'd be removing the structure and I'd be making them feel unsafe. But I mean, go for it. If it works in your group, go for it.
We kind of did this on Monday. We did a Zoom improv show that aired on Facebook. So we got together on Zoom and we simulcast on Facebook and actually did an improv show because of the way the world is. You know, we had to keep that social distancing and everything. But it was a lot of fun, and we were planning to go for about 30 minutes. So we ended our last game with about 5 minutes to go before the planned end. And I said, hey, you know what? Let's throw in this game that we didn't practice, but I think it's going to be a lot of fun. This game is called the breakup game, where we get a suggestion from you, and then we have to make a reason that we're breaking up with somebody because of that. And we went right into it. We'd never practiced it before, and it went over well. It was a safe bet because it was similar to other games that we'd already played, so it wasn't a completely new concept. But again, it was just improvising and saying, "Hey, we got more time. Let's throw something else in there that could work."
Awesome! Wow,
so,
good for you guys. Glad you could do it.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We were talking about you do improv. How did you get into improv, and what do you get out of doing it?
Well, my brother was the one who started doing it. I have an identical twin brother, and when he moved to this town that we're in now, he got here like 6 months before I did. And he'd already gotten into an improv troupe and was all into it. And we had done some improv in high school, but nothing really serious. And now I've been with the troupe for 10 years, which has been a thrill. Like almost the same people for 10 years. What I love about it is, I mean, there's so many things. I'm a big believer in that Christians should have at least one public activity that is not in a church.
And you're listening to the Gifts of Glory podcast, where we celebrate and promote men and women using their gifts, talents, and passions to honor and glorify God. More of this week's conversation right around the corner. Now, you've heard me plug our improv team, Well-Versed Comedy, before, but improv is far more than just stage performance. We are available to come to your church, your office, your group or team, and teach the fundamentals of improv for team building, for confidence building, self-esteem development, and more. What a fun way to bring your people together to learn about each other and to grow closer as a unit. For me, I volunteer with an organization that helps women who have survived sex trafficking. It's such a joy to work with them, to see their creativity rekindled, to help them rediscover the worth that God has instilled in them, and just to plain have fun and laugh like kids again. We'd love to share that and more with your groups. Email us at booking@wellversedcomedy.com, booking@wellversedcomedy.com, to inquire about improv training for your group. Back in just a moment on the Gifts of Glory podcast.
What I love about it is, I mean, there's so many things. I'm a big believer in that Christians should have at least one public activity that is not in a church. So like maybe you go to trivia, which we used to do too. Or you do improv, you play soccer or volleyball or something. Something that gets you out, especially if you don't have kids like me. I don't have kids. Get out there and do something. That way you can meet people, build relationships, share the gospel with people. And having an activity to do that around gives you an excuse to come together. So improv has been that for me. I've gotten to meet people all around town, not just my friends who are in the troupe, but also, audience members who I've been able to build friendships with, and that has been wonderful. But also, being together now for 10 years, well, 11 years for some of them, but 10 years for me. We have been through births and deaths and miscarriages and new jobs and promotions and all sorts of things together. So we have an insane number of inside jokes.
I'm sure.
Insane number of things. And like one word, one phrase can set it off. Even ridiculous things. Like we had a conversation about a year ago about the Golden Girls, that TV show. And we tried to name every Golden Girl, like their screen name and then their real name. And then we got into figuring out how old the girls were when they made the show. And we found out that our oldest member is only like 4 years from becoming as old as a Golden Girl. And so that has become our standard for being old, is when you're as old as a Golden Girl, you're old. And it's just been ridiculous and so much fun. So improv, it gives me that chance to build relationships with people outside of my church. But it also gives me a chance to have like a group of friends that you get to be silly with. Because like, how often do you get to just be straight up silly with your friends as an adult? Rare. It's rare. But with your improv friends, you can just be as ridiculous as you want, and you're going to fail, but they're okay with that. And there's a lot of freedom in that ability to fail in front of your friends, or just say something ridiculous that it just may not work. It's just very freeing.
So with this improv team, being that it's a just a normal, it's not a Christian group,
right?
Do they play clean naturally, or have you run into situations where you're put in an uncomfortable position because you have faith and maybe they're going to maybe a blue or innuendo route?
Yeah, it's changed a lot over the years as we've had members leave. The members that have gone have all been the ones that wanted to do raunchy comedy. And so my brother and I pushed for a long time, like, hey guys, we can't go there with you. So just out of respect, can you keep it clean? And also, if you do comedy, you got to know that it is a lot easier to be dirty than it is to be clean. If you want to show off your skills, you go for clean, because you can't hide behind your dirty language and your innuendo. Granted, it is live on the spot humor, so you just never know what's going to come up in a scene. And my brother and I oftentimes try to go with the alternative meanings for things. Somebody tries to put innuendo in, you go for the literal meaning instead of the innuendo, or you just play dumb. You just have your character be dumb and not know what they're talking about, and you can get around a lot of things. Sometimes if the crowd, we've had crowds that get pretty drunk. And sometimes they'll shout just like really inappropriate stuff. And so you just kind of like bat that away and, make fun of what a pervert they are, that kind of stuff. And then, sometimes they'll shut up, and you can go about your show. Just like you would a heckler in a stand-up show. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's something that occasionally my group works on is, at the risk of bringing in, unholy language, we do practice how do we respond when somebody yells this body part out?
Yeah.
And how would we, if that's the only suggestion we're getting, how do we take that and still work with it? Because you don't want to be completely ignorant or completely block out the audience if all they're giving is bad suggestions. Maybe we find a creative way to yes and that without accepting the reality of the suggestion.
Right.
And I think that's a fun skill to develop. And with improv, I see it. This is how I see it. We serve the ultimate improviser. He walked on a blank stage and spoke a universe into existence. That's kind of what we do as improvisers. It's a blank canvas. And as we speak, we're creating that universe that's on that stage. for that 5, 10, 30 minutes, whatever the case may be. So obviously it's a much smaller scale, but we are in his image, so we're able to create a universe one scene at a time. So there's power, and there's also the ability to tap into that power from God to be able to create something, even if it starts off in a foul territory.
Yeah. Well, something else that works for us well is that if somebody does throw out something that's dirty, we frequently will say, like, hey, we get that all the time. Can I get another suggestion? Because we do. We get people just yelling nonsense. You get the perverts all the time. So we usually just be like, oh, we get that all the time. Can we get something else? And that moves things along without having to acknowledge their dirty minds.
And in my mind, as you're explaining that, I'm picturing a batter that's getting a high inside fastball that's able to just kind of foul it off to stay alive at the plate.
Right.
So that's kind of our job, is just kind of foul it off, say, all right, give me something else to hit.
Right. Yeah. Or else, we'll try to ask for, change this, the get, as they say, like the question that you're asking the audience. You can change that or clarify it a little bit more. And what sometimes we'll do is we'll even burn, like we call it burning those things. But if they say, like, you're asking the audience, like, do you guys have a big question that you want answered, and we don't want them to go political, we'll say, okay, do you guys have a big question that you want answered, like who's going to be the next president of the United States? That way we just burned that one and they can't go there.
Right.
So that there are ways to get around it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I love burning the usuals. Like if you're asking for a location other than Denny's or a Starbucks, because that's usually one that we'll get.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we don't have a Denny's, so that makes sense.
Okay. So what do you guys have out there? Do you have like a Waffle House? Do you have...
Nope. We're 2 hours away from the nearest Walmart. Yeah, if that gives you an idea. Granted, there are 2 Walmarts within close proximity of each other in that same town. So once you're there, you get all the Walmart you can handle. We're 2 hours away. So we do have like a McDonald's and we do have a Starbucks. We have several Starbucks actually. Gosh, what do we get all the time? We get yoga a lot. When you're like, can I get an activity that people might do? You get yoga all the time. And I've been trying to let that one just go away because we do yoga all the time on stage.
Yeah. So other than yoga, give us an activity that you do for fun.
Yeah.
Hot yoga.
Yeah. Hot goat yoga. Yeah. Oh, it's still yoga. Yeah, we do that all the time. Jet skiing, even though there's like no jet skiing around here at all, we get that one fairly frequently. I don't know why.
Wow.
Yeah, who knows?
So I'm taking that your group performs primarily short form games, kind of like Whose Line Is It Anyway?
We do all sorts of things. So we're kind of all over the place, but we realized a few years ago we had a player who went off to Chicago and did some very sort of artistic improv and wanted to import it to us, and we tried some, and our audience just did not like it. And so we're like, well, let's give the audience what they want. They're the ones paying the bills, after all,
right.
And so we have tried some longer form things. We've invented some long form games, which has been really fun. And we're starting to get to the place where we're getting better at them. Or even there's one. Have you played History of an Object?
No, I've never played that.
Oh, it's so much fun. We got it off of, I think Scott Adsit was in one. I don't know if it was Second City. It was him and maybe it was Amy Poehler, somebody like that. But they have somebody comes out and they're like from the History Channel, and they're going to tell you how some random object like a blender had its origins in whatever era the audience wants, the Renaissance or dinosaur times or whatever. And then you do a series of scenes that lead to, like, one leads to the other, that leads to the other, that leads to the other, that demonstrates throughout time, different eras of time, how the blender came to be. And we've gotten much, much better at that one. That one takes a lot of practice.
I'm sure.
Because the host has to like connect all these scenes together. Yeah.
So does the host end up doing like narration breaks in the middle, like,
right.
And then 500 years later, this happened, or
right.
how?
Yeah, usually start off with like a scene that really had nothing to do with the blender at all, and then the host will walk in, interrupt that scene, and be like, "Did you notice how they used this in the scene?" And they like pull one little nugget from that scene and carry it into the next scene, and that becomes almost like the thing that inspired the second scene.
Okay.
The scene thing that, and then they carry something from the second scene to the third scene, which hopefully starts creating the need for the blender. And then, so that by the third or the fourth scene, you start to see that there was a need for a blender-like thing. And sometimes we don't get to exactly the blender, but we create the need for it. And you see where they would create it. Or we create something that is very, very similar to the blender, but not the blender.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. But we've played games like that. And then we, do a soap opera, which I love. We've gotten much better at the long form over the years. But the audience loves the short stuff.
Yeah, I find in general, and this is a very general statement, that improvisers enjoy long form and public audiences prefer the short form.
Yeah.
Just in general.
Right. Yeah, and as our town has gotten, there have been more and more things that you can do on a weekend in our town. There are more parties, more events. And so we're competing with a lot more stuff now than we used to. And so it's like, we just got to give the audience what they want. And we'll sneak in some of those longer form things, but the audience gets what they want because they're paying the bills, and without them, we couldn't do this. So,
right.
Yeah.
So if you had to pick one or two of your, your favorite audience, favorite short form games, what do you think would be your favorite games to play?
Oh, there are so many. I love Fire Drill. I don't know, do you guys play Fire Drill?
No, I'll explain that for our audience.
Okay.
If you can.
Yeah. So you've got two people standing in front and then two people standing right behind them. And so those two people in the front, whenever they are standing in that position, they are a certain character. And then you just rotate the circle around and you get new suggestions. And so each person gets to stand in the front left and the front right. And then that's like, whenever in the front left, they're this person. Whenever they're in the front right, they're that person. And so you perform a bunch of scenes with a host saying, okay, switch left, switch right. And the circle keeps turning.
Okay.
So you like pop in and out of these scenes. And then at some point, once you get an idea who everybody is and what their conflicts are with each other, what their story is with each other, they yell, the host yells Fire Drill. And then everybody mixes it up. And suddenly you're all the characters are mixed up. And so you're there, you have to create a bunch of different scenes with the same characters. You're doing the same character, but now you're acting off of somebody who's a different character, which is fun.
Nice.
It's so much fun. I may not have explained it very well, but it's a blast.
We play a game called Foursquare where you have two people in front, two people in back, and each pair that's up front is playing a different scene.
Yep.
So with you and I are in front, we're playing one scene. Rotate me and somebody else. We're playing a different.
It's the same game. Yeah.
The only difference is the two scenes I'm in. Usually, I'm playing a different character, but in Fire Drill, for both of those two scenes, I'm playing the same character.
No, you're playing two different characters. Yeah.
And so once somebody calls Fire Drill, my character stays the same, but now I'm interacting with at least one other person that I wasn't interacting with before.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I love doing that game. And it's an old one. We've been doing that for the whole 10 years, but I love that game.
Wow. Now, how many people do you have on your troupe?
We have 8, and we were just about to get 2 more in. So we're just at the end of the audition process where we have to kind of like cut them loose or bring them in and like get them caught up. So unfortunately, the coronavirus kind of caught us off guard. And so we may not even have any shows for the rest of the season for these guys to be in. But I'm super excited because they're really funny guys, but we just haven't been able to get them into shows. So hopefully soon.
So with Fire Drill, would it be something that you'd want to risk having a fifth and a sixth person? So when you yell Fire Drill, as part of the Fire Drill, they tag in, and you add a fifth and a sixth character to the rotation.
Oh, I bet you totally could. I mean, that's the beauty of improv is you can twist these games any way you want. It's not like they're trademarked. You can mess with them, tinker with them, and make them yours.
One time we experimented with Foursquare with the rotation, where we'd have somebody tag in who's been watching, and their job is to have watched and gotten to know a certain person's characters, and they tag in and they take on that character in obviously a different person, but they're still playing that same character, and that made it a lot of fun too.
That is a lot of fun. I'll have to remember that.
I like mixing it up and challenging people.
Yeah,
we hired a coach that came in to help us before one of our Second City shows, and she goes, "Wow, you guys play a lot of hard games." I'm like, "Yeah, I like to challenge."
Yeah, of course. Especially if you've been doing it for a while, you want to make sure that it's hard for you, because there are some gimmicky games that you can make. If you play, puppets, the audience is going to laugh no matter what you do. But you got to pick some that are fun for you too.
Yeah. I miss playing puppets. The problem with that is we're a mostly female cast. It's myself and 4 ladies.
Wow.
And inevitably, in puppets, the 2 characters end up hugging at some point.
Right.
And, it's just, as a Christian group, it would be inappropriate for a married man to be hugging another lady on stage like that.
Sure.
So I'm like, I need another dude so I can hug somebody.
Right. Yeah. Well, and there are ways to get around that. If you're uncomfortable hugging somebody, you can always direct the person who's serving you to move you away. I should get that thing that's over there,
Right.
There are ways around this stuff.
Oh yeah, always. So, well, we are almost out of time for this episode. It's been a blast catching up with you. So what I want to do is one of the things I've added since the last time we spoke is wise counsel. For anybody that wants to get into either podcasting or comedy or otherwise using their gifts or passions for God's glory, what would your wise counsel be to them?
Right. I would always say try it out on somebody else's dime first. So what I mean, instead of just starting your own podcast, maybe try to volunteer on somebody else's podcast and see all the work that goes into it and be like, I'm not, is this okay? Am I enjoying this still? I do the same thing when I talk to high school students and they're worried about where they're going to go career wise. I always say just go intern places because people are probably pretty open to having a high school student around who's trying to figure out their career, and then you can figure it out before you go to college for 4 years. Same with starting a podcast. Same with improv. Just go take a class and don't take it that seriously. And then if you like it, go for it. If not, at least you tried.
Right.
We have a tendency to jump in all the way at first, and that. That's not always healthy.
Right.
You may not like it, so why not just try it out first on somebody else's dime?
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Chris Staron of the Truce Podcast and improv comedian extraordinaire. If anybody is traveling through Wyoming, what town are you in, and what's the name of your troupe if they want to look you up?
Yeah, I'm in Jackson, Wyoming, which is just south of Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Parks. And we are the Laff staff, LAFF, we like to say it's all F's, just like the grades we got in school. And we probably, because of coronavirus, won't be performing again until October. So it might be a while, unfortunately, because we take the summers off. But we'd love to have you show up.
So look up the Laff staff, and you're in the Jackson, Wyoming area. And if you're there in October, they should be back on stage by then.
Yeah.
And also check out the Truce Podcast. It's trucepodcast.com.
Yep.
And we'll also have the links in the notes. And Chris, thanks so much for coming on. We kind of scheduled last minute, but I'm glad we connected and had this conversation. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks, Dave. God bless you.